Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss 12 Years a Slave, starring Chiwetel Ejiofor, Michael Fassbender, Benedict Cumberbatch, Paul Dano, Paul Giamatti, Lupita Nyong'o, Sarah Paulson, Brad Pitt, and Alfred Woodard, directed by Steve McQueen. Not the old school filmmaker or whoever that was, but he's an African American director that also directed Widows. Now, I have seen this movie before, and what I think of it is going to be the same as I think of it now, but how do I mean by that? Let's get into this movie. The movie tells the story of Solomon Northup, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, in a very well done performance, and how he became a slave in the 1840s. And it starts with him as a slave while randomly a woman touches him in a weird way as he refuses to do anything because he's a married man. And then we flash back to 1841. Is that what it was? Anyways, it was around the late 1840s is when the opening sequence takes place, and now we're in 1841 when he was a freeman with his wife Anne and kids Margaret and Alonzo as he tightens them up a guitar super tight, and he goes to parties and takes care of his family as he loves them until he meets Brown and Hamilton, who are responsible for putting Solomon in a slave position. And this is Chiwetel Ejiofor's best performance, in my opinion. Solomon gets to Washington and meets Brown and Hamilton for dinner, and next day comes, and all of a sudden is a slave for reasons I can't explain, except Solomon is African American, which makes sense for back in the day, despite he was a fucking freeman. And Birch and Radburn doesn't believe he's a freeman, and they say he's not, as they make a different identity for Solomon and call him a runaway from Georgia and treat him like a slave. While the violence in this is rough. I mean, it actually happened in real life, sadly. And I, for one, don't believe in slavery because it's racist and wrong in so many levels. And another day goes by, Radburn giving Solomon some clothes, and Solomon washing himself up as he helps out a child who is begging for his mama until she does, while the other slaves show up, while the other slaves say something like their masters are not coming for them. And the dialogue is well written. Solomon, Eliza, and Robert, and others get on a ship and talk about a way to survive for days while one gets stabbed and gets thrown overboard. And they get to a land where they'll get transferred to Freeman, played by Paul Giamatti, who gives Solomon a different identity named Platt, which I ain't sticking with, while Solomon thinks of when he was a freeman with all the privileges, while Solomon and Eliza are getting sold by Freeman. And Ford, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, purchases Solomon and Eliza as they separate her from her children, which is very fucked up in so many ways, as this movie is fucking depressing, but it's powerfully made by director Steve McQueen. Not the old famous actor, but the African American director, like I said at the beginning. Solomon and Eliza get to Ford's place and meet the mistress of Ford's, as well as to Beats, played by Paul Dano, and Chapin, who treats Solomon the worst. As for Paul Dano, I don't give a shit what Quentin Tarantino says about him, as he's a good actor, but in my opinion, after seeing Prisoners, he kind of creeps me out, as he was a good part of Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood, and he plays menacing quite well in this movie, while Ford believes Solomon more than Tabitz, as Tabitz treats Solomon like shit, as the cinematography was breathtaking throughout, along with the production designing being magnificent. Solomon and Eliza talk with Solomon saying some powerful line about how he'll survive and brings up freedom, which is powerfully acted by the actress playing Eliza and Chiwetel Ejiofor, as Eliza cries about her children for days, while Tabitz is continuously treating Solomon like shit as he bullies him around, and Eliza is taken away from the other African Americans. And there were a few scenes where it could have gone to the editing room floor, as it's just 5 minutes too long. And Tabitz continuously bullies Solomon until Solomon gets a whipping as Tabitz as he as he threatens to kill Solomon while he continues to build a building for Ford until later in the day, Solomon is forced to hang by Tibbetts and leaves him there while he's still hanging. And I thought, how long does this motherfucker hang for? As he hangs for a while, until eventually Ford comes in and releases Solomon from death and has no choice but to move him away from Ford himself. And the costume designing is pretty well done. Ford transfers Solomon to Edwin Epps, played in another terrific performance by Michael Fassbender, who treats his slaves a hell of a lot worse than Ford does, and his mistress is played by Sarah Paulson, who treats him nicer than Edwin does. And Solomon also meets Patsy, played in another powerful and the best performance by Lupita Nyong'o, as Edwin is all about the whipping with the whips when is a completely fucking dangerous way to treat your slaves. And I can tell Patsy is afraid of Edwin, as that shit between the two in the first we meet her in a flash of brilliance by Lupita Nyong'o and Michael Fassbender, and most of these shots are absolutely brilliant, as that's one scene that filled in the magic of movie making as far as best performances, in my opinion. While the African American stands for Edwin, his mistress throws a bottle at a woman and tells Edwin to sell her, which was painful to see on screen. While next day comes and the mistress makes Solomon go to the market for some goodies, and he almost escapes until he sees some white men hanging a couple of African American men on a tree, and they make him go to them and send Solomon on the way to the market. And this is depressing me, as this movie was sometimes troubling to watch. And next day comes as Solomon is forced to get Patsy from Mistress Shaw's place to Mistress. And Mistress Shaw, played by Alfre Woodard, makes Solomon drink some tea and have a chat with them while Edwin is waiting for them. And that is a beautiful shot, and while the movie is brutal to watch at times. Edwin talks with Solomon as he threatens him, despite he brought her back peacefully, while Edwin hurts himself non-stop by tripping on his own property, until Edwin's mistress comes out and tells him about the violence from Edwin. And that scene was brutal, but at the same time kind of a clever, when Edwin trips on his own property and at night he forces her oral sex on Patsy, which doesn't feel right, as this motherfucker is married. And I, for one, don't believe in spouses cheating on each other, even if they're married. Or next day comes, or not, anyways. And next day comes, and Solomon gets their mail and looks at one letter in particular and gives him an idea of getting him the fuck out of there. While nighttime comes, and the mistress learns Edwin is having an affair with Patsy, and she doesn't eat with the other slaves, as we move on to Patsy waking Solomon up to chat with him about taking her to the swamp and wanting suicide for herself. And the dialogue was depressing as shit, but it works for these actors saying them because it makes sense. Next day comes and Edwin whips on the slaves, and we get back to the start of the movie, and the score was tremendous to hear at times, as well as Solomon working as a slave for Judge Turner and plays the violin again, and thought, wait a minute, did the movie start all over again? But it was under circumstances that it was a different scene, as the slaves walk back to Edwin's house, and Edwin asks Solomon about a favor he did for Judge Turner, and they work on the garden. And I really like the story, despite it takes place in slavery times, but it works for the movie, as it is thus far a very powerful film, and I'll say that much. Solomon asks Armsby, to help him get his life back to normal as a free man, but by depositing a letter to a post office to send. And Judge Turner says he'll do it, but he betrays Solomon's trust by telling Edwin about it, and he doesn't do it anyways, with Edwin talking with Solomon, which was an intense scene. And I believe Solomon is fucked at this point, as he has no way out of being a fucking slave as the days go by. And Solomon learns the song the others sing as well, which is a pretty powerful song, while burying one of their own named Uncle Abram after he dies from being overworked. Solomon works with Bass, played by Brad Pitt, on putting a building together as Edwin tells Bass they're his property and he takes pride to it. And Bass, I get the impression he doesn't believe in slavery, like I don't believe in it either. And one day comes with Edwin acting all abusive about where Patsy is at, as he scares the shit out of the other slaves until Patsy gets back from Mistress Shaw. And are they a married couple? Because he treats her like an abusive husband to her as Edwin makes Patsy strip and Solomon whipping her as he pulls out a gun and tells him to strike her. And this scene was very hard to watch, but powerfully acted by Chiwetel Ejiofor, Lupita Nyong'o, and Michael Fassbender. Eventually, Solomon unties Patsy as she's wounded pretty badly, while Solomon tightens his violin until his string breaks, and he destroys it as well as finishes the building with Bass to help, and he asks for a favor to get him his freedom as he keeps his word and writes a letter to people he knows about where they're at, with Edwin trying so damn hard to fight for a slave as he hugs Patsy goodbye, Solomon, I mean. And he comes back to his home as a freeman and apologizes to his family for his absence, as his wife and older is older, as are his kids, with Margaret being married and have a kid of their own named Solomon Northup Staunton. As this is based on a book that is based on a true story, there is a text that Solomon says never got caught Brown, Hamilton, Birch, and the climax was heavy and depressing. But how heavy and depressing was this movie? Let's talk about it. I'll give this movie a 8.9 out of 10. The actors such as Chiwetel Ejiofor, Lupita Nyong'o, and Michael Fassbender deliver such powerful performances that I'm super impressed with, that they deserve their Oscar nominations. And thank God Lupita Nyong'o won as her performance was the best of any of them. While this movie is fucking depressing for damn sure, like, the violence in this can be a bit rough at times, as the writing in this is well written. The cinematography was breathtaking throughout, along with the production designing being magnificent. While there needed to be at least 5 minutes in the editing room floor, as it's 5 minutes too long, with the costume designing being pretty well done, as most of the shots are brilliant. But when we get introduced to Lupita Nyong'o and Michael Fassbender was when what worked as a brilliant piece of magic of movie making. Like I said, this movie is depressing, as was a troubling to watch at times. But don't get me wrong, this is a solid recommendation for the movie, because the shots are beautiful while the movie is brutal to watch at times, and the dialogue is depressing as shit. But it works with these actors saying these lines. And at the end of the day, it's a powerful film that is also very hard to watch at times, like I keep bringing up, as it was all very heavy. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this review, and until then, it's time to survive.